A remarkable reunion is taking place at the annual wooden boat show in the grounds of the National Maritime Museum at Greenwich. Charles Curry, talking to onlookers, and John Winter, on the left, haven't met for 20 years. They're admiring another old friend, the international 14-foot classic dinghy of them all, Thunder and Lightning, which John co-owned with Peter Scott. Arthur Fox's beautifully designed craft is now cared for by the museum as a historic treasure. For John and Charles, it's a chance to recall the early days of the harness trapeze, a device for going outboard which was so controversial that it was banned.
There we are.
They've also met up to see some remarkable original amateur film, which has been restored from the collections of leading sailors such as Stuart Morris, Mike Peacock, Mike Bratby and John Perry. It's a chance to look back and explore the roots of one of the world's great dinghy classes. Here at Itchenor on the south coast is Arthur Fox with curly hair, talking to Peter Scott, at that time John's great rival. Arthur Fox was the eccentric genius behind some of the finest 14 designs of the day, rivaling the older but very successful designs of Morgan Giles. Here's a youthful Charles Curry, already established as a formidable dinghy racer. And here is John Winter, demonstrating one great advantage of the 14-foot design, its manoeuvrability on land. The boat was a great racer, which was easy to tow and launch. And K290 was John's boat, Lightning. By 1937, the International 14s had established their reputation. There was already a young generation of fine sailors, including Peter, John, Stuart, Charles, and many others. But how had this class become so successful so quickly? For one answer, we need to go back nearly a decade. John Winter remembers these scenes taken on the water near Ely.
I think this must have been about 1928 or 29, where the Cambridge University Cruising Club held a little regatta at the end of the summer term on the river in their old gunter-rigged international 14-footers, clinker built. I look upon this as very much a nursery of dinghy sailing in those days, encouraged very much by Stuart Morris in particular.
There's a certain amount of skylarking going on, probably down to Peter Scott. Alarm was Stuart Morris's boat, and he remembers how he discovered Itchenor.
One day, talking of here, Itchenor, I had a godfather, first cousin of my father's who lived up the way there, and he said, Stuart, my boy, you really ought to come down to Itchenor and stop mucking about on the Thames and trading your dinghy hither and thither. We've got a place you can sail all the time if you want to. And he lent me his expert with his very cook, skipper, head hand chauffeur to crew, and we managed to win our race comfortably. I made the wretched shepherd sit out.
Here is Peter Scott with John Winter, who describes a typical weekend.
This would have been an ordinary weekend. It's racing at Itchenor Sailing Club, to which I used to drive down from Stafford for the weekend, having worked till midday on Saturday in Stafford, drive down to Itchenor, have one race on Saturday evening, and perhaps two races on Sunday, and then drive back through Sunday night start work at 9 o'clock on Monday morning.
Freedom of travel on roads, which were a good deal less crowded than today, was an important factor which encouraged nationwide competition, but it had its perils as well.
That's on the way driving down when we had a mishap. And my license was endorsed with the words "carless driving." I retained that endorsement on my license for many years because I was rather proud of it.
John Winter was certainly typical of the energetic young sailors who tended to make up the core of enthusiastic and competitive racers, packing in as much into their free time as possible, even at their own risk. Once arrived at one's destination, more or less safely, the 14-foot dinghy could be rigged and under sail in very little time. Number 324 was Whisper, the dinghy of Mike Bratby, whose father probably shot this film. John was sailing with him that weekend. And there is Whisper on her way to race. In 1934, Harold Morris, Stuart Morris's father, filmed the race which every 14-foot dinghy racer wanted to win, the Prince of Wales Cup. This was a test of skill over 15 miles, which could take 3 or 4 hours in light winds. Although earlier Morgan Giles' designs had been successful, by this time Uffa Fox dominated the design field. By this time too, John Winter and Lightning was a force to be reckoned with. John skippered one of the 4 boats in this sequence, which reminds us that the 14s had become a truly international class. Again, the portability of 14s made the journey feasible. Just another piece of cargo for the Empress of Britain at Southampton. At the quayside, Stuart himself, hat in hand, is probably being filmed by his father, wishing them bon voyage as the great liner leaves Southampton water for Canada. It's more likely that this film was taken from the Cowes Ferry, but the view of the Victoria and Albert, the Old Royal Yacht and other sites gives a flavour of the last view of Britain. Then as now, it's a busy place with plenty of craft to see. Out of Calshot, the flying boat, probably an RAF machine in this case, makes a stately way towards its destination, somewhere in the British Empire. International 14s could even brave the strong winds of Clydeside. Charles Curry describes the challenge.
I sailed Michael Bradby's boat, and he sailed with me. Hunter's Quay. It was cold and windy. Dear, oh dear. And the wind was always on shore at the launching area. Yeah, and it was only made possible, the whole operation was only made possible because the wind was about 18 to 25 miles an hour, directly on shore. But the day was saved by the ladies of the Dunoon swimming club, who stood, without changing expression, up to the neck in the rather cold Clyde water, holding the forestay until we said, please let go. I would prefer the starboard tack, if you don't mind. Michael and I were very pleased to survive.
On this occasion, someone else is doing the filming, for there is Mike Bratby in the peaked cap. Undoubtedly, Peter Scott, son of the great but ill-fated Antarctic explorer, was a major figure in 14-foot dinghy racing. And the location of his mother and stepfather's home near Lowestoft emphasises the East Anglian roots of the class. Left to right, Tom Paxton, Stuart Morris and John Winter are relaxing with Peter's mother and stepfather, Lord and Lady Kennet, He, a sailor turned politician, Peter's mother, a sculptress of some note. As usual, Stuart is smartly turned out. John is more relaxed. The real business of the visit is at Leo Robinson's boatyard, a mecca for 14-foot construction and repair at that time. Rivalry between Peter and John was friendly but intense. John Winter had won the Prince of Wales Cup in Lightning, K290, in 1934, and was second in the same boat in 35, 36 and 37. Peter had been third in Daybreak in 1936 and won it in 1937 in Thunder. It was a question of who could hold on to the cup. It was always a close-run thing, and this time John is second, while Stuart gets his pot as well. "1938 proved to be a particularly interesting year for international 14s. Peter was racing at the beginning of the season in Thunder. The conditions were seasonally windy, as John Winter points out.
The traditional start of the season was made at Cowes in March. Very often this was an occasion to try out some of the new boats built by AFA during the winter. Here we've got a capsize. AFA officiating at the rescue operations.
The race continues. East of Cowes, they're coming back to the mouth of the River Medina. Thunder seems to be leading at present. Thunder rounds the mark, with the Royal Yacht Squadron in the background. But this time, Peter was beaten over the line by Colin Ratsey of the great local sail-making family. For Peter and John to join forces was an inspired combination, shown here on early amateur colour stock, which brings the past even more to life. Charles Curry was still a great rival, and both teams were developing new devices to give themselves an advantage. It was during the Prince of Wales Cup at Falmouth later that year that both John and Peter and Charles Curry used trapezes, with total success for John and Peter. But here at Itchenor earlier in the year, it's a breezy day, and Stuart Morris finds himself in trouble. A very undignified situation. Charles Curry remembers some of the problems with the 14s of those days.
They're far more difficult to sail than a modern boat, because the masts were completely stiff. You couldn't get rid of the power. When you're overpowered, you've got two alternatives. You can either pinch. You can't pinch for very long, because eventually you stop. Or you let the sheet go. The moment you let the sheet go, you just go sideways very, very fast, and all is lost, really. And in extreme case, all you can do is to then pull the plate up. And of course you could sideways even faster. But that's all changed with all the bendy masts. Now, I sailed a modern boat a couple of years ago, sure. And it's just like driving a car. You just want more power. You have more power, a bit more power, a bit less power. You sit there, it's great. It is like that.
In spite of the rough conditions, John and Peter managed to win again. This fascinating piece of evidence was taken of 14s and Thames raters at a 1934 Easter meeting of Tamesis, a club which Stuart Morris had served as sailing secretary before discovering the open sea. The film shows an early attempt by Beecher Moore to get an extra outboard leverage by use of a device which some see as a prototype of the trapeze. Charles Curry thinks it's all down to the Polynesians.
They had bits of creeper which they hung on to on their catamarans. And you either had a one-man breeze or a four-man breeze. Then you had four characters or four bits of creeper.
He explains why Beecher Moore didn't develop the idea further.
The only reason it didn't become a trapeze was because on the bad tack across the river, you didn't have time to put the harness on, or to hook it onto the harness rather. It was much easier just to hang on the bell rope, and you could perfectly well hang the bell rope for the time you could stay on the tack.
When Peter and John started racing as a team, they had to decide which of their boats to use, Peter's Thunder or John's Lightning, or to have a new boat altogether, complete with lucky black cats at the bow. John recalls the vessel's berth.
Papa did build us what I consider to be the most beautiful dinghy. He took the greatest trouble in matching all the planking to make it look really beautiful. That's why I'm so pleased that she's gone into the National Maritime Museum.
It was in Thunder and Lightning that John and Peter used the trapeze successfully, although Charles Curry's experiment was perhaps less successful. Frustratingly, there's no footage of the crucial 1938 Prince of Wales Cup race, but later that year another trip to Canada was filmed and included some trials using the new and controversial device. Why was the trapeze so controversial? The film shows how much it improved the performance of the boat. Some say it was just a reactionary move against innovation. Others argue that the freshwater dinghy 14s would have been split off from the trapeze-fitted seagoing members. Whatever the reason, it was banned, so the sequence is a defiant test run to show what might have been.
There, look at that. Look at the sails. It looks like a modern picture of a sailing boat now. The mast bent, everything. The mast was bent by that was Peter's flag of the Tudor Rose. All the British team always had that flag. That actually is a classic picture because that's the very first of a modern boat.
John Winter recalls the response to the trapeze in Toronto.
In fact, it was not used in the competition against the Canadians because they particularly asked that it should be ruled out for that series of races because they'd had no opportunity to practice with it. Charles Curry and Ian Mill in Thunder, 388, and there's Peter Scott and James Blewett in Thunder and Lightning 409. Colin Chichester Smith Keith George will have been in Mirage. The Canadian boats had KC on their sails, the British boats just a K.
The Canadians and Americans had used a harness which they fixed to a cleat on the chest, to which they attached a jib sheet. Using a cleat on a harness round their chest had helped to some extent to sit out, but obviously that was nothing like as effective as the trapeze slung from midway up the mast. But however talented the British crews were, in the match the Canadians beat them 3 matches to 1. On the way back from Canada, there were ominous signs of what was to come. Many of the dinghy sailors of the 1930s were to play distinguished roles in the conflict which was now on the horizon. As for the class itself, it was established in its classic form. But Thunder and Lightning, with its planing action, trapeze and fine lines, had shown the way that the class might develop. Post-war international racing got back into its stride. Here are some extracts from the home movies of Mike Peacock, one of the most successful post-war competitors. And sailing towards us is an older but still very active Stuart Morris, now captain of the team and guardian of the rulebook, including the ban on trapezes. We are in exotic surroundings in Bermuda, but the boat hulls are not dissimilar to the pre-war models, although plenty of new ideas and materials are creeping in. But behind the fun and relaxation, a lot of serious fine-tuning is taking place. In this case, it's Stuart who's working on his boat. The dressed boat belonged to the newlywed Glenn Foster of the American team. It had to be cleaned up in something of a hurry for racing. Bermuda is a paradise, but as the wind gets up, the serious business is underway. A post-war International 14, now a classic, is in full flight. The planing action is clear. The conditions are ideal for team racing. Back at the clubhouse, it's time to discuss serious racing tactics. A piece of rare sound footage made by another great sailor of the post-war years, John Perry, captures the flavour of after-dinner conversation amongst 14-foot sailors. Here, Colin Ratsey, he who beat Peter in 1939, is interviewed by Shorty Trimmingham of Bermuda, who won the Prince of Wales Cup in 1952, the first overseas competitor to do so.
Colin, what do you think about racing up in Canada, up in those ruddy freshwater lakes up there? Don't you think it's awful?
Well, I had a lot of fun up there.
Oh, you won a lot of races. That's why you liked it. I didn't win any up there.
Well,
Freshwater threw me right off.
well, now and again I'd meet some of the Britishers who sewed everybody up. They came out at Montreal and we had what they call a steeplechase race over the rocks.
I remembered I lost my rudder in one race.
Yes. I think in one race I talked to the committee and we did $2,000 worth of damage to the 14-foot class. In those days that was a lot of money. We tore centerboards out, we tore rudders out.
That's when the Stevenson family were racing up there.
Oh yes,
They sort of owned the Royal St. Lawrence, didn't they?
yes. Royal St. Lawrence used to put on a very good show, and they parked me in a little motel. And the first night, I was thinking it was going to be a peaceful evening, and somebody started climbing through the vent over my door. He thought it was his room.
That must have been that crazy designer Burke, Charlie Burke, wasn't it?
No, It wasn't Charlie, but it was a crazy crewman of somebody trying to find his way home, and he never did, I don't think, that night.
Stuart Morris had trouble with the tightly rolled umbrella up there. They were doing the limber underneath it. That was the RCYC, sorry, the Royal Canadian. Wrong club, but the right limbo.
Well, the RCYC used to see some fun because there were two nice crew members. I think one was a girl, and she came down one morning and found her dinghy in the swimming pool.
Oh, I remember that.
That took quite a lot of launching to get it out of that.
She was a lovely girl.
Well,
The name began with W. What the hell was her name?
I don't know. Yeah. But we had a mark on that poor girl. It wasn't very kind to put a dinghy in the swimming pool, was it?
Well, that was done by the Imperial Puna, as I remember.
I wouldn't be surprised. I was once a member of the Imperial Puna.
You get blackballed?
I don't think I paid my dues one year, so I've never seen them since.
Their burgee, as I remember, is 3 red balls on a yellow field, right?
It's very effective because when Reggie Bennett, who is now, I understand, Sir Reginald, came out racing dinghies with me at Larchmont, we...
And there the historic narrative ends. Meanwhile, Mike Peacock filmed a rare piece of social history, the hop warehouse in the City of London, owned by the Morris family. Stuart Morris had lent the warehouse to crate the 4 team dinghies before transportation to America for the 1965 team racing. Stuart himself continued a distinguished sailing career, sailing and winning in a variety of boats, elected a member of the Royal Yacht Squadron, and serving as president of the RYA from 1980 to 83, taking over from the Duke of Edinburgh. More of Mike Peacock's unique footage, this time of the east coast of the USA, to the exclusive Ivy League world which once was the preserve of the J-class. Indeed, it had been a foggy day in 1930 during the America's Cup races, when the J racing was not possible, that a challenge was made between 14-foot dinghies instead, the origins of team racing today. The background scenery is different, but the final preparations for a race are much the same wherever you are. The sea has a very different colour from the seas of Bermuda, but the aim is the same, to look for the wind. And here they seem to have found it. The 4 British competitors are planing home after winning the series. Buccaneer, Mike Peacock's boat, is in the wake of the judge's launch, and she is still racing to this day. This remarkable film was shot by Mike Peacock's wife Sue. She's captured the essence of the classic international 14s at their finest. Many radical changes would happen to design, but the tradition of excitement and speed can be seen in these beautiful shots of a classic boat. This completes the classic story of the 14s to the stage when, 4 years later, in 1969, 1 trapeze was finally allowed. Peter Scott was, by coincidence, the chairman of the International Yacht Racing Union who agreed the change. In 1984, 2 trapezes were allowed, and this effectively marked the end of the policy retaining designs which ensured that boats could be sailed equally well on narrow rivers as well as on coastal waters. But the changes have allowed the class to regain its old traditions of innovation and search for exciting and competitive sailing, always at the leading edge.